no matter what they look like. All lives matter, period.
He threw out all lives matter, bro. A white supremacist goes into a black neighborhood to kill, slaughter a bunch of black people, and he pulled all lives matter. So, I know I said I'd cover some bad takes individually, and originally I had another one planned, but I saw this come out last night, and Tucker Carlson had the most insane take I have ever seen. He's doing all the things I said in the last video. Deflecting, minimizing, shifting the blame, all that. Intentionally avoiding the word white supremacy. I can't help but notice so many people on the right are trying to avoid using that word. I think the only person I've heard say it outside of a quote on the right so far is Ben Shapiro. I think he's been the only one. Everybody else, I can't help but notice they're avoiding that word. But this man, he is all over the place. He's trying the old, when it's clearly racially motivated. Now hang on, guys. Let's all be colorblind. Right after this happened. He even goes on to lie about what's in the manifesto. He knows his audience did not read it. And these are the people I cannot stand, are the people who know the material, and they know their audience does not know the material. So they go, trust me, I've read it, and then tell you what's in it, and then these people repeat it. I can't stand people who do this. Alright, so let me show you this.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. There was a horrifying, we're sad to tell you, a horrifying amount of violence in the United States over the weekend, as increasingly there is. Over just 2 days, at least 104 Americans were shot to death in major American cities. That's a lot.
Already, he's setting up the deflection, see?
How many? Well, for perspective, on the single deadliest day of the Iraq War, that would be January of 2005, a total of 37 Americans died. So what's happening in our cities right now looks a lot like a war, even if we rarely acknowledge it.
What does this have to do with anything?
Dallas, Milwaukee, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, many other metro areas recorded murders over the weekend. That's typical now. In St. Louis, 13 people were shot, 5 of them fatally.
Let me ask you guys this real quick. Let me just pause it right here and let me ask you guys this real quick. Does anybody remember when Waukesha happened, which wasn't a black supremacist hate crime on white people, because you have no evidence of that? Does anybody remember everybody talking about crime-riddled white areas? Does anyone remember that? I'm just asking. I'm a legit question, because I don't remember anybody going about, hey, what about all these other shootings or all these other killings in cities? I don't remember hearing that. Why is it now? Why do we hear this now? I mean, I think we all know the answer. It was a bit of a rhetorical question.
Chicago, 33 were gunned down. 5 of those died. In Laguna Woods, California, a Chinese immigrant from Las Vegas walked into a Presbyterian church and shot 6 elderly Taiwanese parishioners. Police say he was motivated by some kind of political and ethnic hatred.
Did anybody else notice that the term Asian on Asian crime didn't show up? Or it's never brought up in this video. I just want to point that out. A term we never hear, and that's not an accident, that's intentional.
And of course, most famously of all, on Saturday afternoon, a teenager in a mock military uniform walked into a grocery store.
He was not a teenager, he was a man. He was 18. See, I love how when it's just look at the news. Depending on the demographics, it changed when you're 18. It seems to change between whether or not you're a man and a teenager. I'm sick of people calling him a teenager.
Store in Buffalo and shot more than a dozen strangers with a rifle. No doubt you've seen accounts of this on the news. What you probably haven't seen are details about any of the 10 Americans who were murdered in that store in Buffalo.
They're up there. I have. What does this have to do with anything? Do you see how that, like, what does it matter? This man is going in every direction except pointing out white supremacy. He's going every... What about Chicago? What about what the victims, who they are? We're not talking about that. Okay. And why do you feel the need all of a sudden to shift to somewhere else?
You may not even know their names, much less who they were or who they loved. Most of them were black. We know that. But beyond the way they look, not a lot has been reported about them, because the coverage hasn't been about them. Nor, in fact, has it really been about the...
And I have a question. Why would you want it to primarily be about them, not saying that's bad, and not the white supremacist? And the concept of white supremacy in general and how that's manifesting physically. See what he's trying to shift it somewhere else.
gunman. He was an 18-year-old called Peyton Gendron. Gendron was mentally ill.
No, he was not mentally ill. I've seen what he wrote was he knew exactly what he was doing.
Everyone around him knew that, including his teachers and the local police. Less than a year ago, Gendron was committed to a mental hospital after threatening to murder his classmates at a school graduation ceremony. So on Saturday, after he made good on his long-standing threat to open fire into a crowd, Gendron left an 180-page letter that he said would explain his motives. You've probably heard this document described as a racist manifesto. But that's not quite right.
It literally was. Oh my God, bro.
It's definitely racist, bitterly so. Gendron reduces people to their skin color. That's the essence of racism, and it's immoral.
What kind of racism? I just can't help but we're going very... You notice how we go race neutral at very select times? Again, I don't recall this with Waukesha. I don't recall this with Frank James, which also a lot of people don't know because a lot of people were lied to on the right that Frank James was actually a white supremacist. Also. But notice we'll throw around the term black supremacy when it's convenient. Now, but when it's white supremacy, we try to shift to race neutral. Interesting.
But what he wrote does not add up to a manifesto. It is not a blueprint for a new extremist political movement.
It literally was. I read the whole thing. He literally explains from point A to point Z how he came into his line of thinking, what he wants to accomplish, what he wants others to do, where he got the stuff he wanted, where he got and where to get it and how he wanted other people to get it. That was all in the manifesto. This is what I'm talking about, where I say he's being such a fucking disingenuous lying snake. He knows what was in it. He's trying to lie to his audience. Because he knows his audience didn't read it. His audience will just trust him and repeat what he says. It sounds like he's running a cover-up for this dude. This sounds like splaining. This is splaining. No, it doesn't sound like. This is splaining. He's trying to splain this away.
Much less the potential inspiration for a racist revolution.
Literally was in there.
Anyone who claims that it is lying.
You see, this is what these racists do in media. This is excusing a white supremacist. This is basically what he's doing.
Hasn't read it. Instead, Gendron's letter is a rambling pastiche of slogans and internet memes, some of which flatly contradict one another. The document is not recognizably left-wing or right-wing. It's not really political at all.
It literally was political, and he was explaining a political movement and a new political movement he wanted to happen and how to do that. He's lying to you. Holy shit, dude. You couldn't just say white supremacy is bad. You couldn't just say that. Amazing.
The document is crazy. It's the product of a diseased and organized mind. At one point, Gendron suggests that Fox News is part of some global conspiracy against him. He writes like the mental patient he is, disjointed, irrational, paranoid. Now, that's true, not that it makes the atrocities he committed easier to bear.
Sounds like you're trying to make it that way. There's a difference between a deliberate, sane, knowing attack and a crazy person lashing out. Those are two different things. Those are not the same thing. He is trying to downplay this as a crazy person that snapped. If you've read the manifesto, that is not what happened at all. Also, I love how, when it's this kid, now he is a mentally ill teenager. I can't help but notice when we use the term mentally ill. It's very selective in media when that term is used to describe people.
If your daughter was murdered on Saturday in Buffalo, you wouldn't care why the killer did it or who he voted for. But the truth about Peyton Gendron does tell you a lot about the ruthlessness and dishonesty of our political leadership.
And here's where he's going to try to shift the blame shift. He's trying to go like, don't look at white supremacy. Look at the left-wing media. There we go. There's the deflection.
Within minutes of Saturday's shooting, before all of the bodies of those 10 murdered Americans had even been identified by their loved ones, professional Democrats had begun a coordinated campaign to blame those murders on their political opponents. They did it, they said, immediately. Patron Gendron was the heir to Donald Trump, they told us. Trumpism committed mass murder in Buffalo.
Did anybody say Trumpism committed mass? I have not heard that. I'm sure some crazy leftist said it somewhere, but I have not heard that.
And for that reason, it followed logically, we must suspend the First Amendment. That's hardly an exaggeration of what they're saying. Here's a selection from yesterday's Sunday show.
Shifting the issue to something completely irrelevant now.
Social media companies and law enforcement have not done enough to monitor, to ban, to restrict, and to limit hate speech on their sites. Hate speech is not freedom of speech.
As you know, the First Amendment does not protect hate speech.
I'll protect the First Amendment any day of the week, but you don't protect hate speech. You don't.
Yeah, it's the classic, Democrat nonsense. It's literal. It is protected speech. We know that. What does this have to do with what happened? See how he's trying to get off topic to something else? He's trying to shift your eyes somewhere else?
Protect incendiary speech. You're not allowed to scream fire in a crowded theater. There are limitations on speech, and right now we have seen this run rampant.
So what is hate speech? Well, it's speech that our leaders hate. So because a mentally ill teenager murdered strangers...
Mentally ill teenager. So, you know how Tucker Carlson always talks about the addiction in white communities and how addiction is a mental illness? Did he ever call George Floyd mentally ill? Just curious. Did he ever call him a mentally ill man? I'm just curious. Just asking questions.
You cannot be allowed to express your political views out loud. That's what they're telling you. That's what they've wanted to tell you for a long time. But Saturday's massacre gives them a pretext, a justification. You have to ask yourself, who behaves like that? What sort of person uses mass murder as an excuse to give a campaign speech or seize more political power?
Literally every politician to ever exist. Moving on.
We'll find out tomorrow when Joe Biden travels to the scene of this atrocity in Buffalo to speak to the country.
I'm sorry, that picture of Biden got me. I'm sorry.
We haven't seen an advanced copy of his remarks, but we can guess what we will hear. Biden's approval rating appears to be the lowest ever recorded for a president this century, lower than Donald Trump's. That is a disaster for his party. The Democratic Party will suffer for this in this fall's elections. Biden still has time to change course and fix it. He could try to improve the lives of voters who are dissatisfied with him. That is entirely possible.
Again, all right. Look how far off this guy's gone. We've gone to shootings in the city, violent crime, this wasn't political, mentally ill teenager, now freedom of speech, now Biden's campaign. He did not address white supremacy one time so far. He's done everything but address what this actually was about.
A threat that by definition is so profound, we must declare war upon it if we're to survive. Now, keep in mind, this threat that Biden is referring to is you. He's talking about his fellow Americans.
He switched this up to the viewers are the actual victims of what's going on. It sounds like that's what he's trying to get at. He's trying to go, yeah, all that was bad. No. But look at Biden. Look at the left-wing media. And now look at you. They're after you. Why won't you just address the fucking problem? this doesn't help your case when the left calls you racist. And then this is your response to a hate crime. Notice he never used the term hate crime yet either. I just can't help but notice we're avoiding certain terms when it's a white supremacist doing it. Just like when the right likes to say all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter. It's just like, okay, why didn't you say that when people said Asian lives matter? Why didn't you say it when they were saying Jewish lives matter? You didn't say it then. Because when it seems to be Black lives, now we kind of have to, veer away from that.
No president has ever spoken like this, ever. Joe Biden does it regularly, and he's certain to do it again tomorrow. But most painful and destructive of all, Biden is likely to use racial wounds in order to make his point. There is no behavior worse than this.
The right does this all the time. Maybe those racial wounds wouldn't be there if the country actually addressed them, instead of constantly shifting to another conversation whenever those come up. Or white people, like certain white ignorants, not everybody, but white ignorants, try to make it about them when you talk about black issues. Talk about reparations, they switch it and make it where they're the victim, where they're being robbed, when it has nothing to do with taking money from white people. Maybe if you address that, we would stop talking about it. You get the point I'm trying to make? When it's our concerns, you don't want to address it. And that's why those wounds don't close. So yeah, I'm not surprised Democrats will exploit it, but Republicans exploit it too, and they make it worse.
All race politics is bad, no matter what flavor those politics happen to.
No, not all race politics is bad. It's the people who say all identity politics is bad. No, it's not. It has its place. A lot of it's bad, but no, there's a time and place. Right? The 60s was a time and place for race politics. And now again, we're off to now all race politics are bad. What does this have to do with it?
To be. No race politics is better than any other. All of it is poison. Race politics...
Okay, so I guess the civil rights movement was poison then. Thank you very much. If all race politics is poison. I'm sorry, there's a time and place for it.
Subsumes the individual into the group. It erases people. It dehumanizes them. Race politics elevates appearance over initiative and decency and all the other God-given qualities that makes every person of every color unique, yet morally equal to every other person.
But America and how it's been functioning doesn't see everybody that way. That's the point. That's why certain discussions need to be had. Notice he's trying to get away from race as fast as possible. That's what I'm trying to point out here. He's trying to move away from it. When all of this was about race, everything about this situation was race. And now he's trying to move away from it. And he's trying to go to he's trying to do this racial kumbaya shit. I can't stand this shit. He's trying to do the colorblind shit. I'll get into why I don't like that in a second, because it comes up.
And above all, race politics always makes us hate each other, and always in a very predictable way. So let's say you were to make...
Why, though? Do you think maybe it's because of how it's framed towards people, that's why it makes people hostile? Or that the fact that you got a lot of really racist people in this country, that if any sort of progress or addressment is made, there's backlash from one group? As we saw with Trump and his platinum plan, just giving an offer made white people mad at him, made certain white people not vote for him.
Make identity politics mandatory in your country as they have. How could you be surprised when that leads, as it inevitably will, to white identity politics? Well, you could not be surprised. You did it, and it was always going to happen. And then what happens next? Nothing good. Race politics is a sin. Race politics always leads to violence and death. They learned that lesson in Rwanda in 1994.
The fuck? Yeah, I saw this. He went on to, deflect over to Africa. Rwanda was about tribes. It had nothing to do... It didn't have anything to do with race. It was about a tribal war. What?
Identity politics ended in genocide in Rwanda that killed 800,000 people. And in response to those horrors, the Rwandans did something that we might learn from. They moved in the opposite direction from the one that Joe Biden is currently taking in the United States. Quote, ethnicity has already been stripped out of school books and rubbed off government identity cards, reported the New York Times. Government documents no longer mention Hutu or Tutsi, and the country's newspapers and radio stations steer clear of the labels as well. Most dramatic is how Rwanda's 8 million people now shun the identifications, the racial identifications, that seemed to loom so large 10 years ago as Hutu extremists began their mass killings, end quote. They have de-emphasized race in Rwanda, intentionally and systematically.
Notice everything has to become race neutral when it's black people being the victims. I'm just pointing this out. Remember? Waukesha, again, not a black supremacist attack. Where was this racial kumbaya shit? Where was it? I didn't see it. It's very interesting when we have to become race neutral. There's a certain group of people where everything has to stop and become race neutral.
Rwandan citizens are citizens first, members of racial or tribal groups second, or not at all. There have been no more genocides in Rwanda. And that could easily be the path forward for this country, too. There was only one answer to rising racial tension, and that's to de-escalate and do what we have done and tried to do for hundreds of years, which is work toward colorblind meritocracy.
Oh, my God. See, every time I hear anybody on the right preach colorblindness, my suspected racist alarm goes off. Not because the concept of colorblindness is bad. It's a utopian idea that doesn't exist. But it's because the right doesn't use that consistently. They use it as a way to excuse themselves. Because y'all colorblind until you want to talk about other stuff. You want to be colorblind when it's white supremacy, then, when it's convenient, then all of a sudden you want to go black on black crime, black fathers, black... That colorblindness goes away real quick. That all-American shit, that goes away real quick. You turn it on and off whenever you want. Which is why I don't believe anybody when I hear this shit.
Or other. We have a moral duty to do this because all people have equal moral value, no matter what they look like. All lives matter, period.
He threw out all lives matter, bro. A white supremacist goes into a black neighborhood to slaughter a bunch of black people, and he pulled all lives matter. Remember when all those right-wing ignorants were bringing up Asians in New York? Where was the race neutrality then? I didn't see it. But when it's a white supremacist, now we got to shift away from race and make it race neutral.
That's not the determination of the U.S. government. That's the determination of God, and it's true. And most Americans already believe it.
Don't bring God into this, dude.
They would like to see a return to the American way of life. And the American way of life is meritocracy.
That has never been the case in America.
Judge me by what I do, not by how I look, by the content of my character, not the color of my skin.
This always pisses me off. See, this one in particular, I always get, I get fucking triggered when people do this. Because so many people whitewashed and bastardized what MLK actually said. And they take that one line, and they take it intentionally. Because he said a lot more in that speech that they're not going to tell you about. That these people like Tucker Carlson are not going to tell you about. That same speech, King warns about this in that same speech. He warns that if you keep trying to brush this under the rug, and you keep trying to kick it down the road, and you don't want to address black issues or any of this stuff that's going on, if you just want to keep going like, we don't want to engage with this. This shit's going to get louder. Everybody's going to get louder. But everybody on the right, nobody knows that speech. No one's read it. Nobody's listened to it. Nobody's read anything he's ever said. They just like pulling that one word and they try to weaponize it back against us. Seriously, if you ever talk to any of these right-wing ignorants, I don't care what color they are, anytime they bring up that line or try to quote Malcolm, or just ask them what else they said. Just ask them what they said after that. Watch, they don't know what they're talking about. They've been programmed. But, hey, if the left wants more fuel, that Tucker Carlson kind of might be a white supremacist. I mean, they had his writer, right? They remember his writer? I mean, after something like that happens, shifting the blame away from what actually happened and excusing this kid, I think you just gave him a ton of ammo, dude. Are these your big brains on the right? Man, no wonder black conservatives can't fuck with y'all, man.